of week 9. Okay, so thank you to everyone who's submitted assessment 2. They're looking fantastic. It's going to take us a couple of weeks to be able to read them all through carefully and give you some feedback on them. But this week I want to start you thinking about your final assessment for this subject, which is your essay. So what we're going to do today and a little bit next week as well is to think about our topic for the week, still thinking in terms of how contemporary art is framed by topics and how that helps us think through topic areas and keywords and the kinds of concerns of contemporary art. We're going to do this and we're going to start looking at it instead of through exhibitions like we have been. We're going to start looking at it via essays. So what kinds of essays are being written about art and in what way do they connect with some of these other ideas that we've been talking about throughout this subject? So today we're going to talk about art and science. And we're going to do that by looking at a couple of essays on art and also a couple of case studies of artists who have worked with science. Now what I want to do today is to think about science very broadly, so all of the different ologies and isms of science, all the different ways that science operates in the world today. And why would this be one of our key focuses for this subject? I guess the main reason for this is that art today, in contemporary art, we're looking at art interacting with and working with many different disciplines. And key to the way that we think of the future, which is your essay topic, is thinking about these relationships with art and science. As this article by Tom Jeffries and Fries says, with global issues cutting across disciplines, this is where we need to start thinking about the mixing of art and science and how it can help us kind of address some of the issues in the world today. So let's have a look at an artwork from Australia. This is a work by an artist based in Canberra called Mitchell Whitelaw, and it's called Weather Bracelet. This is a really detailed close-up. It's a bracelet, it sits around your wrist. Here we go. So Mitchell made the weather bracelet in 2009 by taking 365 days of Canberra weather, the data from that weather, sourcing it from the Bureau of Meteorology, and then turning that data into a data form that he could then prepare as a bracelet. The outer rim of the bracelet shows the daily maximum and minimum temperatures, and the holes show the weekly rainfall. And you start to get a sense of that there are large periods of time without rain. There are periods of time when there's extreme temperatures. What we have is an object that functions as an artwork, as an aesthetic object, but also as a piece of data. It helps us to understand something more about the world. As Mitchell said, the weather, so much part of our everyday sensations, is abstracted into numbers and symbols, only to be remade in new sensual forms. And he's sort of asking the kinds of questions that an artist would ask. What if we could see the wind across an entire continent or hold 100 years of temperature? What might that feel like to hold the temperature or hear the tides as music? Another artist who engages with the weather, this is just to get us starting to think about these kind of art-science collaborations, is this work by Nathalie Meebach called Weather Scores, in which she took multiple recordings of a hurricane and then represented them both as a 3D musical score and then as a flat musical score and then as this 3D object to be performed by musicians. Or taking it into another discipline, this work by Darren Armand, simply called A, which is a single channel video installation, which is interested in sort of taking the feel or the weather of Antarctica and giving it to us affectively. So we feel the presence of the weather of the ice, of the cold. As he says, A is a landscape made up of air, liquid, and gas in different states. So we wouldn't usually look at a work like this and think, oh yes, that's about an art-science collaboration. But in order to travel to Antarctica, to be able to film the work, in order to be able to understand even what air, liquid, and gas are, Armand has worked closely with scientists. So quite often a collaboration might not look like a collaboration, but it might actually be working in the background with scientists and bringing those kinds of understandings to an aesthetic or art practice. I really strongly recommend you have a look at this work. It's beautiful. It'll take you to another place for a period of time. But it's also unsettling, and it's unsettling because of what we know about what's happening in Antarctica, and not just weather, but climate, but sort of global ecosystems change. So we can go from weather and we can kind of map things out. So rather than give you a pair of theoretical readings like I had intended to, what I decided to do for today was to give you two articles that were both published inside eFlux, which is an art and culture magazine. And both articles do a particular job. They weave together artworks with philosophical concepts, with scientific concepts. And it's this weaving together of artworks with concepts that I want you to start thinking about as you move towards your final assignment. So the first essay I've given you to read is this one by Jennifer Garbris. And in it, what she does is she talks closely about a work by Harun Farooqi, which is about sort of computer vision. The artwork's called Parallel. And in it, she talks about Farooqi's work by sensing the ocean. And she uses this idea of sensing and navigating the end of this world to actually show how NASA and a number of different places are sensing the movements inside the ocean itself at the moment. So she uses these images from animations from outer space, which are visualizing ocean currents and ocean movements. So it's a very literal bringing together of the scientific devices and the digital devices of science with this kind of geopolitical work that Harun Farooqi is doing. So it's an essay, it's probably about 4,000 words long, and it focuses just on one artwork, but entangles with this artwork all these concepts of the end of the world, of navigation, of digital and remote sensing, and takes it to the oceans. So takes it into the space of environmental sensing. She's interested in a way that this artwork helps us to know and understand something about the planet. So that's one of the two essays I've given you. The second essay I've given you is by an artist, Teresa Castro, called The Mediated Plant. And this is a bit more experimental in terms of how it brings together art and science. It begins with a reading of a children's book that she had as a child that sort of showed all these experiments about whether plants could sense fear or anxiety, how plants could sort of connect to us as humans. And she shifts this reading of this children's book into a kind of a philosophical meditation of her own on the queering of botanics. So the idea that we can shift into a reading of queer and queer spaces by taking this kind of early scientific work and using it to challenge the way that the planet is being reshaped today. She uses the work of Val Plumwood, an early Australian environmentalist, to sort of introduce this idea of queer nature, and then uses that to engage more broadly with the field of non-human studies and biology. So she tells us this really fascinating history of wired plants and how it's possible to uncritically kind of engage with plants, but also as soon as we critically engage, we start shifting the boundaries of what we understand nature to be. And this is the queering practice that she brings into this. So that's your second essay to look at And what I want you to do when you go through them is look at how they convincingly connect art with the broader world and with also these discourses of science. The next essay that I want you to look at is the one that I'm going to talk about today. So this is an essay that was published in Artforum in 2005 that appeared to be authored by an association, the Association of Freed Time. The association was actually a group of an artist collaboration, including artists like Pierre Gouy, Alexander Meer, Francesca Grassi. It was about 11 artists who all, according to this article, travelled to Antarctica to witness global warming. Now, what was really not clear was whether they actually ever travelled. So it was never clear whether this was an actual journey, a journey that wasn't, a journey that occurred in a fictional space. But as you read the article, you get taken through this kind of history of the journey. You see images of the journey itself. You see the artists on the boat in the ice, and you have this sort of language that sort of starts to talk about the idea that as you go on this journey, you're going to move outside of the known world. The journey is to Marguerite Bay in Antarctica, with the idea that once they got there, they would discover these kind of new animals or this new kind of way of being on the planet. But the text of the journey, the text of the essay, sort of starts to make it difficult to believe. At one point, the onboard computer indicated that the boat had made contact with an island. If it was there at all, it must have been immaterial. So they're playing with the fictional spaces of the journey, the fictional spaces of what it means to make art. We see the artists arrive in this icy environment, and we hear through the narration that they're there to find this rare species, this rare albino penguin that is living in this bay. They release a set of sounds into the atmosphere, and then for a certain moment, they say in the article, it stood upright, perhaps a few feet tall. It blinked its round eyes, unaware that anyone had been searching for it all these weeks. So you can see how the artists are playing with language, with the fictional space, but also they're narrating a story of an artwork. The artwork was taken from Antarctica and then travelled. This is the releasing of the sounds in this sort of light beam, and you can see the penguins watching on. They took the artwork back to New York, where they restaged it as an ice-capade, as an ice dance in the middle of an ice rink in the middle of the city. And this is some images from the restaging of the journey that wasn't. So we have an artwork that is also an essay, that is also a fiction, that is also an ice dance performance. And we pull all these things together and we start to understand a really unique way that the artist is engaging with kind of scientific practice or scientific understanding, but doing it from an aesthetic position. So doing it in such a way that the fictions and aesthetics of art are the things that we use to understand what's going on. The second work I want to address is a series of works by collaborative artists David Haynes and Joyce Hinterting, who are based in the Blue Mountains north of Sydney. And David and Joyce also engage with the science of fiction. So they're engaging with electromagnetism, they're engaging with the planet, they're engaging with all the physics of the planet. This is actually Joyce standing under some high tension wires south of their house, holding up two fluorescent tubes, just your everyday house ones, and there's enough electromagnetism kind of pervading the air that these two tubes light up. So they call this an encounter with the halo field that is surrounding the electricity wires themselves. So this kind of encounter is what drives their practice. In 2004, they took this encounter into the gallery space and made a work called Purple Rain. In Purple Rain, they traced the turning off of the analog television system. So in the gallery were a series of analog TV antennas that were receiving the last few moments of analog TV. They received this data, and the data was then fed to a video projection. And as a result of the distortion and noise from the sound, the video projection would suddenly cause these huge avalanches to occur in the mountains. So Haynes and Hunterdinck are making visible the unseen atmospherics that occur around and through our bodies. They start to sort of shift this into the spaces of the gallery and make us understand our relationships with space, with the physics of the planet, in a really different way. Things that we sort of take for granted, that are everyday, suddenly become seen and known otherwise. A more recent work by Haynes and Hunterdinck is this work, Geology, that some of you might have experienced at the MCA a couple of years ago. Here's the work installed. So the work is an enormous screen space. Might give you a sense of the scale there. It's an enormous screen space that is controlled by a single person standing on the black dot you can see. The person is sending commands through their own movements to a Kinect motion sensor and controlling their journey through this moonscape, this sort of geological space. The work was made in response to the earthquakes in Christchurch in 2011, and what they did is they went to Christchurch at the time of the quakes and made recordings of the shifting ground, the shifting plates, the planet moving, and then used those recordings and that sense of sort of seismicity to start creating this fictional world made up of geological elements. In the work, you can fly and travel across and through the space, and you find yourself approaching these kind of little cubes. I don't know if I've got any here. No, I haven't got any here. These little cubes that are little cube-like spaceships, and you go up to them and you smash your way into them, and inside them you have the sense that you're inside another geological environment where there are people collecting and harboring and caring for the rocks. So what Haynes and Hunterdinck do is they give us a direct immersion in the geology of the planet, a way of understanding how plate tectonics operates, and a way of feeling the sensation of the seismic waves as they pass through and across our bodies. One last work by David and Joyce is this work, Earth Star. So as I've given you a sense of, they're dealing with the scale of the planet, the scale of the atmosphere of the planet, and then Earth Star, David and Joyce actually engaged with the scale of the sun being our Earth star. So in this work, they made a number of recordings of the sun itself, using a really cool sort of camera telescope setup so that they could actually gather these images of the sun, which are played in the projection at the back. They also recorded the sound of the sun, the sound of whistlers that come off the sun, and those are captured and then played back through these copper coils that you can see sitting on the two tables. So we have sort of this live feed from the sun of audio, which has been captured through these very low frequency antennas. We have the video of the sun. And then throughout the space, was a synthesized scent of ozone. So the sight of the sun, the sound of the sun, the smell of the sun, and all of these things together is, in a way of kind of mapping the sun as it is and as it might be understood by us as bodies on the earth. So by pulling together all these different ways of mapping as an artistic practice, Haynes and Hinterting help us think about the way that we understand, measure, map, think through our relationship with this planet and with our star, the sun. By doing this, they're engaging in kind of art science work. They're using the tools of science and the tools of art to kind of shift the way that we might understand the planet, but also to shift the way that we understand what art might be and what art might do. And so this returns us to this kind of first question that I asked: why think about art and science together? So what I've done is I've given you two examples very quickly that shift the way that we understand both art practice and science practice, shift the way that we start to think about our aesthetic engagements with the world as a form of contemporary art and a form of contemporary thought. So you've got these artworks as kind of case studies. I've given you two of them. You've got the two articles that I talked about as ways that people have written these stories together. If you're interested, you should follow up and find the Pierre Hui article and have a read of that as well, because that again is an example of an artist using these kinds of scientific techniques, field work, travel, taking samples. All of these are techniques that are familiar to the sciences that are actually part of an artistic practice as well. In part 2 of today's lecture, I'm going to focus exclusively on how to write your essay, or more simply, how to begin to write your essay. Okay, thank you.